Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. As we established in our rigorous analysis of the first 5 chapters, we've systematically dismantled the inherent existence of causality, motion, perception, and even the physical aggregates. Now, we're taking the Madhyamaka X-ray and turning it inward to deconstruct the irreducible elements of the mind itself. We're specifically diving into Chapter 6 of Nāgārjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, an examination of desire and the desirous.
Alright, since you already know the territory, let's bypass the basic introductions and jump straight into the logic. It's fascinating how Nāgārjuna instantly corners the Abhidharma opponent's views on consciousness. The Abhidharma philosophers genuinely believe they had found the fundamental, inherently existent building blocks of the mind, but Nāgārjuna sets an inescapable trap. A desiring consciousness simply cannot exist prior to desire, nor can desire just wander around in a vacuum without a consciousness to possess it. They have to rely on each other.
So here is our cognitive roadmap for today. We're going to execute a rigorous 11-step diagnostic to dissect these psychological atoms. We'll start with the Abhidharma mental triad, apply the tetralemma, and then journey through emptiness, the union of the two truths, the middle way, and finally wrap up with conventional use and liberation. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the Abhidharma mental triad.
Step 1 of our diagnostic really establishes the trap of the Abhidharma philosophers. They constructed what you might call a periodic table of the mind. They identified 3 distinct spheres in this mental triad. First, you have RAKTA, that's the successive moment of consciousness, or the desirer. Second is saha, the relation of concomitants, basically the union between the two. And third, rāga, the specific mental factor itself, like desire. Now, they viewed these 3 spheres as simultaneous, highly real entities that somehow just perfectly locked together.
Moving right along to Section 2, applying the tetralemma.
Time for Step 2. We pull out our universal Madhyamaka diagnostic tool to systematically shut the conceptual doors on this inherent triad. Let's test the relationship between these spheres by pitting absolute identity against absolute difference. It completely reveals the absurdity of absolute concomitance. Think about it. If the consciousness and the mental factor are exactly the same absolute entity, concomitance is mathematically impossible. A thing literally cannot sit next to itself on a park bench, right? But if you swing to the other extreme and say they are absolutely different, well, now they're hermetically sealed realities. They have no intrinsic link. Trying to make 2 absolutely independent things interact is like trying to build a bridge out of 2 clouds.
We just keep pushing this logic until the conceptual mind surrenders. We prove that these 3 spheres cannot be inherently existent over time. They cannot be non-existent. They cannot be both, and they cannot be neither. We also prove they can't be many or one, separate or united. By watching these psychological atoms fail across all 4 logical gates, we completely dismantle that massive Abhidharma structure. Absolute concomitance is just a logical impossibility.
Which brings us to Section 3, emptiness and dependent origination. Here's the million-dollar question. What actually happens to our intense emotions when this rigid conceptual structure collapses under its own weight? This covers Steps 3 and 4. Step 3, we absolutely must conclude emptiness. Because all extreme positions fail, the 3 spheres lack independent essence. And from that, Step 4 just naturally flows, dependent origination. The spheres are inseparable, interdependent, and co-evolving. The desirer and the desire define each other exactly like left defines right. They are merely co-imputed designations.
And, by the way, this brilliantly illustrates why this philosophy isn't nihilism. If your mental software was hard-coded, if your anger or desire were inherently real, solid atoms, no cognitive update could ever install. You could never heal, learn, or change. Emptiness is precisely what allows for the fluid process of healing and enlightenment. Emptiness is literally what makes liberation mathematically possible.
Now for Section 4, the union of the two truths.
How does this deep philosophy meet our messy, everyday lives? Steps 5 and 6 synthesize our findings perfectly. Step 5 elegantly unites these concepts, noting the union of the 2 truths regarding concomitance. The first truth, dependent origination, is our conventional everyday world of causes and effects. The second truth is emptiness. The vital realization here is that these aren't competing realities. They are the exact same reality viewed from 2 inextricable angles. The psychological spheres function dynamically purely because they lack intrinsic substance. One truth completely enables the other. Wrapping up Step 6, because of this union, we have to recognize that these 3 spheres are basically illusions. They are there, yet not there. Sure, your intense desires cause very real physiological reactions in your nervous system, sweaty palms, a racing heart. But if you search for their solid, permanent core, it reveals them to be highly functional karmic mirages. They're like reflections in a mirror or echoes.
Zooming out for Section 5, the middle way. Now we move to the macro level to apply this realization to the cosmos at large. Step 7 utilizes the generalized tetralemma. Think of this as an advanced logical tool that constantly slaps our hand away anytime we try to cling to a conceptual raft. We affirm that these three spheres, and actually all phenomena, are not this, not non-this, not both, and not neither, for whatever this happens to be. It proves that reality utterly transcends all of our conditioned dualistic concepts.
Skipping ahead to step 9 of our diagnostic, we conclude that the middle way is the only logical attitude to hold toward the mind. It is a completely non-dual stance, totally free from all extremes, whether that's this or non-this, and totally free from the middle, both or neither. There is absolutely nothing to inherently accept and nothing to inherently reject. It offers this immense peace when the rigid bones of our psychological identity just dissolved into a fluid flux.
And our final pivot, Section 6, Conventional Use and Liberation.
So, step 10. How do we actually live with this day to day? We conclude that we can and should use these concepts, consciousness, desire, concomitance, conventionally, but never in absolute terms. It's acting without acting. You utilize these labels as mere tools, without attachment, without reification, and without that effortful grasp, all while fully knowing their empty, mirage-like nature. That is exactly what frees us from the suffering of grasping.
Finally, step 11. When those heavily defended boundaries of the ego dissolve, we're invited to just rest in the suchness of reality. We might as well perceive everything, including these three spheres of the mind, as primordially equal, pure, perfect, divine, and one. And we mean one strictly in the non-dual sense, right? Not many, not one, not both, not neither. The boundaries of the self, the collective, and the cosmos simply melt into an inseparable, luminous flux.
So, there you have it. We've taken the Madhyamaka X-ray to our very own minds. Chapter 6 firmly concludes that both absolute concomitance and non-concomitance are completely impossible. Reality is entirely beyond dualities like that. This leaves us with a profound philosophical quiet, but also a really active challenge. Knowing that your emotions and consciousness are completely empty yet beautifully functional, how are you going to navigate the karmic mirage of your own desires today? Think about that as you go through your day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the nature of your reality.